Hi, this is Lossy. Lossy is a love letter to the special kind of digital degradation that happens to audio when it's shrunk, transferred, and compromised. Lossy can tap into a lot of familiar turn of the millennia vibes, though it should be noted you won't find a specific format or influence replicated here, but instead a wide-ranging exploration of all the right and wrong sounds made possible through data compression. It's both familiar and unlike anything else. In this video, we'll get up and running and take a look at the big picture building blocks that make Lossy great. But don't forget to check out the field guide and MIDI manual for even more context. Okay, here we go. Before we make any music, let's talk about how to get audio in and out of Lossy. Lossy can input and output mono and stereo signals. If you're working in mono, use a TS cable for both input and output. If you've got a mono input that you'd like to process and output in stereo, use a TS cable for the input, enable the MISO dip switch, and use either a TRS cable or a stereo breakout cable like this at the output. For stereo input and output, the same idea applies. You'll need a TRS cable or adapter for going in and coming out. And if you want to use Lossy to create wide stereo movement, turn on the spread dip switch. If you'd like, you can control Lossy with Expression, CV, or MIDI. See the field guide for more information. While it's not technically part of the loss section, now is a good time to mention that the global knob sets the overall amount of processing in place of a mix control. You can think of global like a macro knob that increases the intensity of everything. Okay, let's begin our journey by talking about the loss section, which includes these controls. The loss section analyzes and breaks down your input audio, degrading it and pulling out a stream of harmonics and artifacts. The loss section is made up of two distinct switches that you can mix and match, packets and mode, as well as a set of very versatile knobs, loss and speed. There are 3 different loss modes to choose from with the mode switch. Standard, a lossy data compression reminiscent of a low bitrate digital MP3. Inverse, a counterpart that plays everything stripped away in standard mode. And phase jitter, which simulates inaccuracies in phase and timing due to imperfect clocking. The packet switch offers 3 additional options. Packet loss, the rightmost selection, randomly generates brief audio dropouts. Packet repeat, which is on the left, follows the same idea as packet loss, but instead of silence, the spaces are filled with spectral smears. And finally, clean, which is in the middle, removes the packet effect for a steadier, more stable sound. The loss knob controls the depth of the loss and packet effects. This will control both the strength of the effects as well as which frequencies are affected. The speed knob controls the rate of the loss and packet effects, as well as the update rate of the freeze, which we'll talk about in a minute. Slower speeds introduce spectral smearing and leave space between packets. while faster speeds become more garbled and textural. Lossy comes equipped with a useful and powerful bandpass filter. Bandpass filters allow a selected band of audio to pass through while rejecting everything else. The filter knob sets the width of that band. As the knob is turned clockwise, the filter becomes narrower and more focused. The frequency knob sets the cutoff of the filter, meaning the frequency range where the filter is active. Bass frequencies are found counterclockwise of noon, highs clockwise of noon, and mids are somewhere in the middle. The filter and frequency knobs are highly dependent on one another, so be sure to spend some time experimenting with both the size of the band allowed to pass through and various cutoff values. The slope switch adjusts the slope of the filter. Gentler slopes have a mellower and more full sound, while steeper slopes are more resonant and focused. You can also turn the filter inside out by flicking on the invert dip switch. Now, you will only hear the frequencies that would normally be filtered out. Lossy's reverb is as digital as could be, with a warm character and unique decay that fizzles and sputters. Rather than creating realistic sounding spaces, it's instead reminiscent of the reverbs used by electronic musicians in the early 1990s. The verb knob is a simple mix control. If you'd like to adjust the decay time, there's a hidden option for that, accessed by holding down both foot switches. Longer decays are on the clockwise end of the sweep. You can place the reverb before everything else or after with the pre/post dip switch. Pre feeds the reverb into Lossy's other parts, exciting and enhancing their effect. It makes for a more cohesive and expansive sense of degradation. Post will give you a more traditional reverb that steadily trails out, regardless of whatever else Lossy is doing. This can have a useful smudging effect that blends everything together. Lossy contains a unique and versatile type of freeze effect. It can work like any other freeze. Hold the left foot switch and the current sound will infinitely sustain like an ambient pad. You can now play over the top of the frozen sound and freely shape it with Lossy's various controls and modes. Nice and simple, but it can also do more. The freeze is able to update itself and become a shifting spectral copy of your input audio. We call this the slushy state. Tap the left foot switch to turn on freeze in the slushy state, or hold to toggle between solid and slushy when the latch dip switch is engaged. The speed knob will adjust how quickly it updates, while simultaneously controlling the packet and loss modes. By default, the freeze will take over completely once engaged, which can be very interesting in its slushy state. But you can use the hidden option labeled Freezer to adjust the balance and reintroduce some of your live audio. Okay, let's take a look at Lossy's gate, which is engaged by holding down the bypass foot switch. Now, all audio quieter than the cutoff will be silenced. It's a simple but powerful tool for adding a layer of dynamic, audio-controlled loss to the mix. Let's engage the latch dip switch while we're exploring the gate. When holding down both foot switches, we can use the filter knob to change the gate cutoff level. At low cutoff values, it can create sputtering effects like a distant radio station. Higher settings will consume your sound, only letting through little blips of audio. Here are a few other helpful nuggets of wisdom to keep in mind as you explore Lossy. Lossy has a powerful limiter built in. The threshold hidden option sets the threshold of the limiter. The lower the threshold, the more limiting. The limiter helps keep the output levels consistent and also brings out the details of Lossy's various modes. It tends to make signals quieter, so it's often helpful to compensate for this using the loss gain control, which is the hidden option associated with the loss knob. The slow dip switch captures the classic sound of the Lossy plugin, bigger, darker, slower, and with more latency. All Wet is a special mode designed specifically with live musicians in mind. In standard operation, Lossy uses a digital dry signal that adds a very small amount of latency. This will be fine for most situations. But All Wet allows you to switch over to true analog dry through if you prefer. In this mode, the reverb is always set to 100% wet, and the verb knob becomes the analog mix control. As with all Chase Bliss pedals, Lossy includes internal modulation, called ramping, that gives you the ability to automate its knobs. And there's a lot more to discover, of course. Read the field guide, explore, fall apart. Have fun.